What do you get for the ex-president who has nothing, at least in terms of a legacy, who started one pointless war and left an unfinished another essential one? Inflated the budget deficit to $1.3 trillion, trashed the U.S. economy. Turns out you don't have to get him anything. When in our fourth story on the countdown, the man in question, our nation's 43rd president, is perfectly prepared to celebrate himself. Having thrown out the first pitch at the Texas Rangers home opener earlier this month, former President Bush now gathering the old gang together to make a pitch for himself, hosting a reunion to plan his own presidential library, museum, policy institute, and foundation. Same legacy burnishing, same circle of advisors, different location. Instead of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, about 20 top advisors meeting last night for a welcome dinner at 10141 Daria Place, the president's new home in the Preston Hollow neighborhood of Dallas. Among them, former communications chief Karen Hughes, former counselor Dan Bartlett, speechwriter Michael Gerson, as well as former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, all in attendance. Perhaps a good thing Dr. Rice was on the guest list, because until 2000, the Preston Hollow Neighborhood Association's covenant stated that only white people were allowed to live there, though an exception was made for servants. Notable for their absence this week in Dallas, former Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, former senior advisor, erstwhile turd blossom Karl Rove, and former Vice President Cheney. A new opinion research poll for CNN showing 72% of Americans disagree with Mr. Cheney's view that some of President Obama's actions have purportedly put the country at greater risk, only 26% agreeing with him. Let's turn now for some perspective to former White House Press Secretary Scott McClellan, author of What Happened Inside the Bush White House and Washington's Culture of Deception, coming soon in paperback. Scott, good evening. Thanks for your time tonight.
Good evening, Keith. Glad to be back.
The Policy Institute, possibly the most controversial part of this entire Bush complex. It's a political think tank. It is designed to promote the Bush policy on issues such as the Iraq War and things that might be considered similar to it. Didn't we just have 6 years of that? Was that not one of the fundamental focuses of the administration itself?
Well, yes, we did, and that's a good point you bring up, because this gathering in Dallas is really the first meeting of the Bush Legacy Shaping Group, which happens to include the core members of the White House Iraq Group. And I think some of their thinking is still grounded in the mentality that was used to sell the war in Iraq in the first place. There's more of a focus on trying to create or spin an alternative reality than coming to grips with the reality of where things went wrong and how this administration went off course, and addressing those issues head on in an open and forthright way. There's a lot to be learned from this presidency, and the only way you can do that is, and the only way you can actually shape his legacy for the better, is to begin by addressing those issues, the controversial decisions that he made, whether it was Iraq or Katrina or the economic crisis that unfolded on his watch and the management failures related to them. The only way you can really begin to shape that legacy for the better is to accept responsibility for those mistakes and those management failures related to those issues.
Well, this is sort of an extension of the Iraq management failure, if you will. Where's the vice president? Is the dispute over a pardon for Scooter Libby so great that it outweighs his value on the subject of Iraq historically and from the president's perspective?
Well, it is notable that he's not there. I don't suppose he's visiting Spain at this time either. But, the vice president does still harbor some bitterness. Well, two things. You mentioned Don Rumsfeld earlier. He harbors bitterness about the decision to replaced Don Rumsfeld with Secretary Gates back in right after the election in 2006, and he also harbors great bitterness over the decision not to grant Scooter Libby a full pardon, even though the president did keep him from spending a single day in prison. But the vice president does remember those things and hold some bitterness about them, and I think that that's probably showing some strain in their relationship post-presidency, although they still do talk from time to time, as has been reported.
I'm going to say something nice about President Bush, so you may want to buckle up. But is it possible that President Bush was upset just on the nature of a former vice president freshly out of office criticizing the new president over the issue of national security? Could it just bother him on some president-to-president basis?
I'm not so sure about that. I think that, certainly the vice president, we know that this happened while he was in office, I think was expressing his own views, even though the President Bush, that is, might share some of those views. It's not something he would condone to say publicly, particularly at this point in time. I think there are two key points to be made about the poll that you brought up and the reaction to the comments that the vice president made. Let's take the flip side of the argument that Cheney makes. The vice president continues to deny that there's any legitimacy to the fact that the Bush actions, whether it be the misbegotten war in Iraq or the embrace of coercive democracy or interrogation techniques that went beyond what our values in America hold so dearly, contributed to greater hostility and greater ill will in the world, in parts of the world especially where there is a breeding ground for terrorism, that created greater hostility and ill will toward America. He continues to deny that. It shows how little credibility he has to make such an argument and make such really a specious accusation against the current President of the United States.
Scott McClellan, former Bush White House press secretary, author of What Happened. It's always, and I use this word carefully here, cathartic to speak with you, Scott. Great. Thanks once again for your time, and good luck with the book and paperback.
Thanks, Keith.